Welcome to On Track. I'm Ayisha Jaffer. Loneliness has increasingly been described as a public health concern linked to both mental and physical health. But instead of asking only why individuals feel lonely, researchers are also asking how the places we live shape connection. Through a research effort called Universal Belonging, the University of Louisville and Simmons College of Kentucky are examining how place, policy, and community influence connection across the city. I spoke with Lauren Anderson, a program manager at the University of Louisville's Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute, and Jecorey Arthur, an educator, community organizer, and professor at Simmons College of Kentucky. Both are contributing to the study. Lauren, starting with you, for listeners hearing this term for the first time, what does the idea of a universal basic neighborhood mean?
The idea of a universal basic neighborhood can mean a lot of things. It is not a simple concept, but what we are trying to communicate when we use that term is that our neighborhood should be able to provide the foundation of what we need as people who live in society together. And so how that takes shape for each community will be different, but it should provide the basic necessities for us to live healthy, happy, and fulfilled lives.
And then this newer study on universal belonging zooms in on loneliness. How are the two connected?
Traditionally, we have thought about loneliness as sort of a personal problem, but from our research in environmental medicine, we know that the environment shapes how we act, it shapes how we interact with each other, and so places shape how we behave, and it can shape belonging. And so if we have a universal basic neighborhood, a place that provides for us to be healthy, happy, and fulfilled as people, then necessarily it would provide us with opportunities to connect with our neighbor, experience fulfillment, and belonging within our communities.
Why did the team choose to focus specifically on older adults?
This project is focused specifically on older adults because even though loneliness can impact everyone across the lifespan, from teenagers to older adults are going through life changes that put them in a higher risk category for loneliness. They could be losing spouses or partners. They could be retiring and losing sort of the meaningful fulfillment that a job would provide every day. And so when we are going through these changes, we need to be mindful about how we are protecting our mental health and the strategies to cope with those changes.
And just to add, why loneliness, why elders, we know that to have universal basic neighborhoods that meet our needs, we need to have some sort of social and political action collectively as a people. And you can't do that if you're alone. And we know that our elders have that history, whether we're talking about the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement. History shows us that the power of the people is stronger than the people in power. So we always have to make sure that the people who are disconnected from a larger social group, they are connected with that group, not just for the sake of building social relationships, but also for the sake of making decisions about the communities that they live in. They know what they need, they know what they want, but they need to be brought together to take that collective action.
Now, I'm thinking about the public health concern about this, too, because loneliness is described by the U.S. Surgeon General as a public health concern. Why is loneliness more than just a social or emotional issue when it comes to health?
It is a risk factor for lots of other downstream conditions. And so when we're experiencing loneliness, that causes stress to rise in our bodies. We're not getting one of the things that we need to be, healthy. And so it is a risk factor for developing things like heart disease, developing depression. And whenever you are isolated, if something happens, aid does not get to you as quickly. That is one of the most important parts, is getting seniors connected together for preventative safety and to make sure that those risk factors aren't increasing.
Where's the study right now in terms of time and progress? Where are you at?
Sure. We are about 20% of the way through, so this is a 5-year project. We have just wrapped up year one, and year one really focused on establishing our baseline. Where are risk factors clustered in Louisville? Let's test to see through surveys if those risk factors do culminate in increased loneliness. And then this year we will be returning to some of those places for some targeted interventions to increase meaningful connection amongst older folks.
I'm thinking about those risk factors as well. Louisville Metro Public Health data shows that where you live can mean more than a decade difference in life expectancy, especially between predominantly Black neighborhoods and better resourced parts of the county. How does that context shape your research?
Yeah, going back to what we discussed about collective action, something that we're hoping comes out of this is not only interventions to bring people together and address loneliness in the moment, but they develop relationships long term. And some of those interventions are based on collective action. Age-Friendly Louisville, that works on making the city more friendly for senior citizens, they're constantly trying to build relationships with people in the community. We're working with KIPTA and their advisory council to make sure that the work that we're doing is anchored in their needs and their wants, because they are so connected with our senior citizen population. But we're looking at what does policy change look like long-term to address loneliness? And we're working right along with the seniors. So as we think about that life expectancy difference, that's the point of this work. What do we need to do in our communities, whether it's housing, whether it's an environmental issue, whether it has something to do with violence? What are we doing in our communities to intervene along with these elders who have lived here and know the streets and know the neighbors so that we can change those outcomes? It's a systemic issue, and we got to organize people to address it.
And just for clarity, for those who don't know what KIPTA is, what is that?
KIPTA, they do development work. They have senior citizen program, and they also do infrastructure projects.
Jecorey, I want to talk to you about, from your perspective as a community organizer and researcher, how have you seen loneliness show up in Louisville neighborhoods that have experienced long-term disinvestment?
Well, when we think about people power, no one feels more powerless than someone who's alone. You feel like you're going through a struggle alone, but the truth is there's always somebody out there who's struggling right along with you, dealing with the same issue. So once we can make those connections through common struggle, we can really have common bonds and use that to take that collective action, whether it's a tenant union, it might be a labor union, it might be a neighborhood association. But when we see people who are lonely, that means they're looking for a community of people that they can thrive in. And like you mentioned, everyone should have a role. I always compare it to being a musician. And when you're in that orchestra, there's different sections of the orchestra, different instruments within that section. There's a conductor. Everyone has a role. So what's your role? And I think for our elders in our communities, as they've gotten older, over time, they have felt like they might not have seen themselves in the work that's being done, or they might not have seen themselves in a specific role. But everyone has a gift to offer, especially our elders. We wouldn't be here without them.
Now, I know we're touching on this a little bit, but how has race, culture, or gender influenced the responses that you've heard so far?
Race and gender have a lot to do with how we experience the world, and literature would suggest that just being a man is a risk factor for loneliness. And so, that is one of the results that I would expect to see in the survey results that we've just finished conducting, that women often take on the labor of social engagement for a household or a family. And so because that is the way it often happens, we are lucky in that we hold the social cards for our networks. And so we're a little bit insulated as it comes to aging or these life changes. Women tend to have a greater support network. So one of the ways that we know that we need to impact loneliness sort of at this population level is giving people the tools they need to feel like they are confident in making those social connections. And so that can vary based on your lived experience. So what is it that could be helpful to help men participate in meaningful engagement whenever maybe their spouse has left?
And when it comes to just how race is contextualized within this, talking about the life expectancy differences, that's not simply, just based on geographic location. You have to point out that the west end of Louisville is predominantly black. The east end of Louisville is predominantly white. These are racialized policies and environmental injustice that we've experienced. And, when I'm thinking about the interventions that we introduce, you might have a group in the west end of Louisville that is more concerned about simply surviving. They might not care to do an intervention that's more social in nature. They would love it. It would be nice. They're thinking more intentionally about what is the long-term impact of the intervention that we could do to change our conditions. Everybody has different struggles. So when we think about the racial differences, we're thinking about how is loneliness impacting you? How's the environment impacting you? How has policy impacted you over time? And we know there's clear differences between the east and the west end of Louisville, or black and white Louisville.
You're talking about how it varies neighborhood to neighborhood as you're assessing this, but what kinds of neighborhood level changes or supports are being explored through this universal belonging study?
So at Simmons College of Kentucky, we have a course that is solely dedicated to working on this project. And something we identified last semester through our observations is there are different parkways or public parks within the west end of Louisville that might not be accessible for infrastructure reasons. So Chickasaw Park, for example, right along the Ohio River. It's beautiful deep in the West End. But if you look around Chickasaw Park, there's no crosswalks to get to the park if you're across the street. There's a lack of sidewalks on some of the side streets. So if you're walking or rollerblading, skateboarding, rolling a stroller, you got a wheelchair or walker, it's dangerous for you to get to one of the most beautiful parks in this region simply because of the infrastructure. So that's one small example, all the way up to the fact that we know that our elders are usually on fixed income, but they're struggling with housing instability. And we know that the cost of housing is rising constantly, whether you're a renter or you're an owner and your property taxes are increasing. So we're looking at all sorts of interventions from small scale neighborhood action that we can take all the way up to policy.
It's so interesting to think about that infrastructure too. Sidewalks is one that I've heard a lot, and knowing just access to something that's right there. And it seems like simple fixes, but they're challenging. So based on what you found so far in your research, what kinds of neighborhood conditions seem to help people stay connected, and which ones make loneliness more likely?
So another park in the Russell community is Elliott Park. And I'll point that out because recently there's been some investment from our local government into the park. And that investment has paid off. When we went to observe in Elliott Park, when the weather was decent and it was in the evening, people were, finished with work, there was about 100 or so people there consistently that were gathering in the park, socializing, barbecuing, talking, listening to music. That's what community looks like. Our parks, our libraries, our community centers should be being used. And overwhelmingly, we noticed in our observations, if it was there, whether it was a park or a bench, it was being utilized. A store, it was being utilized. A library was being utilized. So, the phrase goes, build it and they will come. We have seen that with our own eyes when we go out and observe these communities.
Just to reiterate the importance of those different types of places that Jecorey just described. So in the literature, we call those third places. And again, places tell you how to act when you're in them. And so if you build a park with area for Tai Chi, with areas for older folks to play chess or young people to come play music, if you build those things, they will come and use them. But it's up to, the people who are making decisions to make our infrastructure welcoming and share what our values are. Our values here are to come together and interact socially.
What other kinds of early insights are beginning to emerge so far?
How much people love their neighborhoods. So one of the questions in the survey that we conducted last year is, do you like your neighborhood? 81 to 100% of people agreed that they very strongly or strongly loved their neighborhood. And so that suggests to us people are not disconnected emotionally from the places they live. They might just be disconnected socially. And so we need some sort of catalyst to get them back out in the world and interacting again. So that's why we're so focused on organizing and third places, having spaces for people to come together.
Yeah, and I'll just point out, I always gravitate towards policy change, the organizer mindset. But organizing interventions doesn't necessarily mean we're changing a law or getting somebody to not vote for something. It also means maybe we put together a walking club. Maybe we put together, a chess league at Elliott Park, because building those social connections is really key to establishing relationships. I cannot go to the Capitol with you to work on policy change if we haven't even sat together, to get to know one another, to play the game of chess. We have to develop relationships in baby steps almost before we can get to that point. And as far as anything else that we've noticed, it's not sexy, but public restrooms. This is something that our city has really neglected. And a couple years ago, when I was on Metro Council, we introduced a resolution to assess public restrooms, hand washing stations, and drinking water fountains to get a map of where these are in the city, what conditions are they in, where are the gaps. And as we go out and observe in these neighborhoods, we're noticing there's a lack of accessibility. We know that's important for everyone, but especially for our parents with little kids, especially for our unhoused population, especially for our senior citizens. Everyone has to use the restroom, but these are basic needs that we're missing.
Now, you were talking about policy, and I just want to ask you, Jecorey, what does it look like when research like this translates into meaningful neighborhood-level policy change?
It looks like the anti-displacement law that Louisville passed, the first of its kind in the country, where we used research. There's a housing needs assessment that initially came out in 2019. A new one came out in 2014 that said, this is the stock of housing that Louisville has. This is the stock of housing that Louisville needs to have. And because of the suggested policies within that document that was put together by researchers, we were able to take it and do something with it. Oftentimes when we do research, it sits on a shelf or it sits on a website and we don't necessarily do anything with it. This project is different because not only are we doing the research, we're also providing the interventions and, again, trying to establish long-term relationships between people that go beyond the research itself. So when we think about policy change, it's just a natural evolution to the work that we're doing. We want to do something with the research. We don't want to just talk about the problems. We want to try to address the problems.
I mean, loneliness is increasingly recognized by public health experts worldwide as a serious issue across ages. I know your research focuses on older adults, but are there lessons from this work that might apply to all of us?
Absolutely. Again, it takes a village, and these problems and the solutions are common across the age spectrum. And so when we talk about organizing to increase the number of public restrooms that we have, or we're talking about organizing to establish a chess league in Elliott Park, the intergenerational nature of that will be very important. So our youth has something to teach our elders have something to teach our youth. And again, the youth can't do it all on their own. They need to learn from the people who've been there before, and we need to bring everybody along.
Yeah, and everybody should see themselves in this work. You know, everybody has or had a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a parent, you know, a teacher. You know, we see elders in everyday life, and they have a role to play, again. So how do we see ourselves in this work to better the world, not only for them, but also for the fact that we'll be elders one day? Whether it's in the next decade or the next few decades, we should want to make our city better for generations to come. And if we aren't thinking about the elders that we have now, we should be concerned for the people who will think about us when we become elders.
And I'm thinking about this research now. It sounds like it's universal, but your findings are specific to Louisville. Is there anything that you feel like is very Louisville specific in this loneliness research so far?
Well, I mean, you've pointed out some of the issues with the life expectancy differences. Louisville's also one of the cities, one of the highest rates of single occupancy drivers when it comes to commuters. That's a key indicator of loneliness, you know. So there's so many issues specific to Louisville when we think about this weird argument between, are we Midwest? Are we in the South? We in the South. But, you know, that comes up when we talk about racialized policy. So I think it's specific to Louisville in that sense. At the same time, KIPTA, for example, touches different counties around our county, Jefferson County. And we're seeing an opportunity to establish some of these interventions here. But eventually, we would love to work with other counties. We would love for other counties to adopt what we have going on. Age-Friendly Louisville has work groups, you know, social isolation work groups, housing work groups, and they have other chapters across Kentucky that are looking to us to lead by example. And we believe that through our interventions, through our research, we can establish a model for other counties to use across the Commonwealth, but maybe even across the country.
Mm-hmm. Before I let you guys go, what do you think is one small thing people can do in their own lives or communities to help combat loneliness?
Reach out to someone every day. Text someone, call someone, email someone that maybe you haven't talked to in a little bit. But just those low-level, everyday, mundane, sort of boring connections. That is really what will sustain you throughout the life course.
Well, Lauren said, I mean, I think it's easy, especially like in the social media age, to kind of just blast things out there and hope that somebody gravitates towards it and connects with it and find community in a digital space. But have you ever taken an article and sent it directly to somebody and have you seen this? What do you think about this? What do you think's going on? And just having a conversation about what's going on in our community is key. Or not, just checking in, saying, hey, I love you, I'm thinking about you. I cannot express how important those small points of communication and connection can be for somebody, especially if they're dealing with deep depression, especially if they feel powerless, especially if they feel all alone. You know, that text could literally save a life. You never know. So because of that, you never know what somebody's struggle is and what they're going through. What Lauren said, just figure out a way to reach out to somebody, whether it's a family member, a neighbor, a friend. Well,
Jecorey, Lauren, thank you so much for being here on Track.
Thank you for having us.
On Track is produced by Louisville Public Media. Our production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Laura Ellis, and me, Ayisha Jaffer, with support from Rebecca Feldhouse-Adams and Alex Biscardi. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. Find more at LouisvilleOnTrack.org, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Thanks for listening.
vast stockpiles of data. But 80% of it is unusable by AI. That's a lot of missed opportunity. The Highland Content Innovation Cloud is the only platform that makes enterprise content and unstructured data agentic AI ready, secure, and actionable, so you can make real impact for the people you serve. Incredible opportunity is here with Highland. Turn insights into impact.